Well, thank you so much, everyone, for returning here today. We have many people still in the audience online, and all of us are still here. And I'm very excited to open this panel discussion and welcome you here back, but also encourage all of you to take a stance, to exchange and to discuss with us all the notions that have been raised today. But perhaps at the beginning, I just take the freedom to not really summarize, because it is impossible to summarize today's discussions. They have been so rich. But I would actually love to point to a few moments in our discussions that perhaps for me were quite seminal. But before doing this, I also would like to return to Luigi Borotto and his a beautiful message from this morning, and the good morning note that we also hold in our hands here at this table, and we would like to honor it in his absence. And I would like to emphasize again that we are sitting here, as he said, in an archive, but also in a house, right, in a factory, which we had the pleasure to visit yesterday with Patricio. And with others. It was an amazing experience, but also an experience of, an archive as a truly living entity. For those of you who are not familiar with Fondazione Borotto, we really encourage you to make an appointment with Enrica and with Patricio and come visit perhaps. Not everyone can walk through the factory, obviously, this is what Patricio told us, but it makes an impression, actually, of a true symbiosis between us and life, between work and the kind of aesthetic experience that the archive actually evokes, and it really, I think, left a lasting impression on us. So thank you again for the visit. So again, Luigi this morning emphasized the fact that we are not only sitting here in an archive, but also in a space that lives in a house and in a factory in which the works, as he says, never stopped being active, right? Never stopped. Beautiful. So where do we go from here? And I think we might ask, I have a question that could be posed first, could be that in order to activate, to kind of understand what activation is or might be, we first need to also address the question of the archive is, right? Is it something that is static or something in constant flux? And we learned very much that it is exactly the latter, right? It is an entity that is in constant movement and metamorphosis, a space of potentiality that offers us infinite kind of set of possibilities to activate it, to reactivate it, or to actualize it. Another kind of really interesting notion that I discern, that I kind of fished out from today's discussion, was the notion of the archive as a living space, right? A space of and for activation, not only for artists, but also for scholars, right? Then something that also, and I will come back to this notion of accessibility shortly, but something that really also struck me in this relation was that what was mentioned was the fluid category of archival objects, and that there's the kind of archival objects could exist between documents, relics, and artworks, and even concepts. We had this question also in the chat. We heard about the archives, the archive that should be similar or might be similar to the work that it archives, right? And this notion takes us to the notion of hybridity, not only, I think, in this kind of binary or in this kind of relation between the digital and material, but also in terms of intermedia, something that Patricia also mentioned at the beginning as an entity that exists in between. So intermedia chat was also one of our points today, and perhaps we might delve more into this in this discussion. The intermedia chart as a living entity, again, right, undergoing additions and subtractions, and the kind of questions that it poses. When does it stop, right? And where does it rest? And is it, you know, where the archive, if the archives give birth to the kind of infinite potential of the work, then where all those so to say manifestations, right, or iterations of the work, where do they go? Do they enrich the archive? And you know, what does it mean for the archive? Does the archive swallow all this kind of potentiality, right, in a recursive way, or what happens there? So I hope we'll discuss this and related questions. Then another really interesting, I think, question that came up through the presentation was really the question about the work, right? Where is the artwork then in this kind of conception of the archive? Is it does it rest in the document, in the instruction, or in, you know, one or singular manifestations? Another, I think, a really interesting issue was the notion of the openness of the archive itself, or rather its closure, right? The question of the closure of the archive, or of the artwork itself. Again, thinking here of the Higgins diagram, or, you know, the question about where the archive stops. And when the archive stops, I think, as Lionel was presenting it earlier today, what does it mean for it, right? Is the activation this kind of process of constant rearrangement, a fluctuation of, you know, of the kind of archival matter, where addition takes place kind of externally rather than internally. If you imagine the archives as sort of, you know, visual bubble. Can the archive take in all the material it produces? I think this is something also that we could discuss here. I know very much that Aga and Josephine is very interested in those notions. Then the access of the archive, and I have just a few more points. The access to the archive that I think was most strongly evoked by Elke Allgeier, the last presentation. You know, what gets from the archive, what gets drawn from the archive actually determines what we know about the work, right, and about the archive itself, and what kind of activation actually the archive allows for, right? But I think, you know, this was really inherent to all the archives that were presented during this event today. I think also, you know, an amazing link here is present in Elke Grun's presentation, where she presents Ben Patterson as a sort of living memory, you know, a living body, embodied Fluxus knowledge, versus or put against this kind of, say, museological paradigm of the, you know, one singular enshrined works, right, that gets archived and gets pulled up from the archive in this kind of more fixed, right, frozen state. So for me, perhaps, you know, also what really came through, what wasn't really thematized, because this is obviously not something that we can go into in infinity, is that the archive, you know, contains its physical space, but it also contains its kind of virtual space, a space of the kind of potentiality, non-physicality, you know, a space which bears its full potential. And last but not least, you know, the nomenclature is absolutely interesting here, you know, in relation to the archive, but also in relation to our, I think, you know, activities with the archive, the issues of identity, originality, authenticity, but also, and I think as Aga really nicely started to think with us here today, in terms of the toolbox, right? What kind of practicalities and how can we kind of translate this into something that, you know, archivists, conservators, and museologists can take further in terms of archival activations. So yes, I think this was obviously very subjective and very selective. What I try to kind of recall in this short not summary, but in this short kind of note. But with this, I would just love to open up the discussion and see whether we could basically react to one of those questions, or perhaps expand on them. or perhaps there is already an urgent question that we could pursue.
I can start. I'm just giving, this is all connected, and thank you very much, Hannah, for this wonderful overview of all the subjects. And I think we have to really make a book out of it because, it's kind of very complex. But I would love to kind of engage back with the Elke's presentation, Elke Grün from Wiesbaden, because there is something super interesting about this idea of non-existing archive, right? So Wiesbaden is kind of a legend, a myth, or how we can call it, but there's like no material behind it, other than the memories or the stories. Documentation, but it's actually this all this stuff is not there. And I was just wondering, but there is a lot of amazing work of activation done during this history that you have showed us, right? And I was wondering, is there any initiative to actually build an archive in Wiesbaden, even collecting or preserving those activations back, right? So because it's such a rich material that you are producing by actually engaging with those work and with those stories and with those memories. Is there any plan for that?
No, not as I know of it. There's actually a building, a bunker of the Second World War right behind the museum. And we had a private investor who wanted to make a Fluxus hotel out of it.
Wow.
The bunker is Fluxus hotel.
Yeah. And it was basically 2 weeks before it was decided in the city parliament to give this piece of land to him. And it was like everything was arranged. The city decided that they would buy this piece of land by themselves for further usage.
Nobody knows, but it's prime position in Wiesbaden. So we have the museum we all know. Then there's at the moment a new museum being built which will have a lot of Gutai and abstract expressionism. And then another 50 meters further, it's a Kunstverein. So we have that really strong connection between those buildings. So it would have been wonderful if there would have been a Fluxus hotel with on the ground floor some sort of a modern museum, again activating Fluxus, not showing old pieces, because there is no old pieces. Right.
So I'm trying to promote it, and now the problem is that the investor will not do it because he needs the piece of land as a security against the bank to be able to build this. So I don't know what's happening there, but otherwise I don't think, because I think that's the problem. As a museum director, you have to deal with your collection in a way, and there is nothing. We have the private collection of Michael Berger, and but again, he's 82, and we don't know how much. What's happening with this? We don't know how much is. Partly it is sold already to everywhere in the world. How much can stay, because the whole building, it's like an old farmhouse. He's got a church house, so it's like a whole area full of art, a lot of art of Fluxus artists, and it's just there, and it's closed. You can call him and he would show you everything, but it's not like a museum where you can just walk in and pay your ticket and walk in any time. So yeah, Wiesbaden has an enormous asset, and they're just not yet using it. So that's part of my energy I feel like an ephemera archivist in trying to make it alive and make it feelable for whoever is there, that there is something. Because we have that hour. And I didn't get to the point to show you my last slide, but my last slide is actually, there's one more piece of Fluxus 62, what nobody knows, and it's actually in the Kunstverein, and there's 4 seats from the lecture hall, which was saved by a member from the Kunstverein, and he gave that to us. So we actually have 4 seats, and you can sit on the original seats. It's fine. If that is of any good feeling.
Right, so maybe the magic can be
can come
transmit through those seats, whoever is sitting on them, right? Okay. Yeah, good luck with that. Fingers crossed.
So I just wanted to build on the idea of there not being many holdings at Wiesbaden, and Ben Patterson's response to this that you spoke about with his flying double bass. And I just wanted to ask you, was there any significant difference between the double bass that he made originally, his first one, and then this later piece?
I think I have to pass that question almost to Hubertus, because I've never seen the first one. I wouldn't say the original one, because Ben refers to both as original.
You must.
You must.
Even if it's a deferred originality.
Yeah, deferred original. I've never seen it because it's probably online.
I showed the slide.
Okay, but it was like too fast.
Slides.
But I think the idea is very similar. So it might be different items on the double bass, but the general idea, what's on, is the same. But it would be like a different brand of cartouche or whatever. Yeah.
It's a flying. Let's say the one of the two is it doesn't have so many elements on it. It's a flying cello.
Yeah. Okay.
With wings, like Estaferre's piano with
Just
wings.
the wings. Yeah.
It is a flying cello. So it's not so much. There's not so many other elements like those small gas things there.
Yeah. Okay.
On this, perhaps they fell off. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we talked about this before, but I always felt like Ben was looking at sculpture a bit like at performance. So there would be just different work. I mean, whenever he would do a sculpture, it would be slightly different. So there was the idea, and he would just repeat it.
And you mentioned, I think, as well, that it had a different title, that you called it something different.
Yeah. So the Wiesbaden version is called double flying bass, and I think the Konz version is only double bass, or the other way around. I can't remember, but it's slightly different. But I don't think on purpose; it just happened.
I find it really interesting as to whether he would consider it as a reproduction or a new work that he'd produced for a specific situation.
It's a new one.
Exactly. New one. Right.
Thank you.
I think most of the artists, as far as I know, did not think of a reproduction. And if they were asked, like Konz did ask here and there for the Pound project, for reproductions, they would make new works.
Right.
So they would just continue the work they were about to do.
And maybe add new ideas to it as well, like so they're slightly different.
Otherwise, it would be tremendous boring.
Yes, that's the point, isn't it? Thank you.
Thank you.
We have some comments in the chat.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I just saw Hannah Higgins commenting on the Higgins, obviously, intermediate chart. She says, quote, Dick would love this opening up so much, the opening up, I believe, of the work. So glad the diagram is doing its work. Thank you to everyone. We hope, Hannah, thank you so much for your comment. We hope to keep you here, and perhaps we could converse, although we have the rule that we don't turn on the mics of the audience for some technical reasons, but please do stay with us, and if you have any other questions or comments, that would be great. We also have a comment from Mary Campbell. Thank you for presenting this information so timely for me, since I am curating an exhibit of Dada Dada collective, past 20 years of Fluxus-inspired performance, and hoping to present our archive and make it as fresh as when it was presented. Also, as a part of it, we are also organizing a Fluxus Fest in New York City in October, between the 12th of October and the 15th of October. Any suggestions or questions? This is quite an open question for this panel. I don't know if someone has suggestions, which I think we would have to know more about this. But perhaps we could turn back to this question of temporality. And I just noticed that in my short summary, I actually skipped one position. The idea that Huberto so wonderfully evoked at the beginning or in the first session of today, that the archive has in fact a temporality, and there are this diachronic or at least temporal relations in the archive that I think are hugely evocative of anything we're thinking around the notion of activation and the notion of the artwork as coming from the archive.
So
Yeah, that's quite a competition in terms of invention.
Let's just forget it.
I mean, with every so let's say every reduction, you are creating an alterity. So it is always an alterity with regard to what we think is the original. So you create the space in between, and we are in this space. So we are not linked to, in the famous Benjamin thinking, to one object which has the aura, but we are creating a new object between the so-called original and the reproduced. And this is where either the game comes in as one possibility, where we try to reach some kind of limits of the frontiers, and the recontextualization of the object comes in there. So of the archival object. And this is and I liked it what Leonard and Lydia said before, we are carrying a high responsibility facing those objects. And we are, because the moment they came in there, they are changing structures. And this structural moment of the object is what I would link to this deferred originality. And which means that we are not only in the contemplation, but we are in the moment of creation. And this is our responsibility, or you can say it's our task of translation that we are facing.
That's beautifully put. So would you imply that each archival intervention is in essence creative, a creative gesture?
Absolutely.
But how would then, the distinction between this kind of more perhaps scholarly, I'm not training here, any kind of notions of objectivity, but I think there might be a difference between creative interventions in the archive done by artists, or let me put out the word creative, and interventions in the archives that scholars, researchers, and say other individuals do.
But historically, the archive, where the traces are preserved, they are preserved for the future. So everybody who's working in an archive must assume this responsibility constructing the future. So this is the main task of an archive, and historically as well. So this is what I mean. And I would not make a difference between the classical archaeontes, who were there to look who's allowed to come into the archive or not.
The question of accessibility.
Accessibility. In ancient times, of course, there were only very few who were able to access the archive. They were allowed, politically and ethically allowed to enter the archive. Today it's different. And today we have the media, as we see, we get very different things on the screen than we thought. So it's a different position. But we should all share this idea, being artists or being somebody who's really doing archival work, indexing, whatever. The responsibility is perhaps on different realms, but they share it if they are doing something for the time to come. And once you enter this responsibility for the time to come, you have this diachronism, or diachrony, or diachronism of times, which is the essence of the archive. If you fix it and freeze it, this is the W.H. Auden said it's very beautiful. It's the dust on the roses.
Beautiful.
So it's the dust bowl, the rose bowl with dust, the dusted rose bowl. And this is not what we want to do.
Yes. And Hubertus, just on this note, and I promise to stop shortly, but I'm very interested in this kind of, philosophical behind the notion of temporality. And if we were to replace the diachronicity, all this kind of then and now and the future, which implies a linear notion of time as well, right? A linearity, a time notion in which the past is replaced by the present, and there's, some kind of future that we imagine. If we were to replace it by another, notion of time. I'm not saying that it is better or worse, but that's what they are alternative notions. And just wondering, how that, perhaps it's a, open question, and one doesn't have to answer, but how would, how could we kind of engage with the archive in another temporality if we thought of time as, percolating in Serre's way, right? Or a time that is duration, the present, the past actually enters in the present.
Fuck you all, fuck you.
Bergsonian work, and there is an anticipation of the future. How would that, if you could imagine this for a moment with me, this would be lovely.
The noises are back.
The moment we enter a material which does not belong to our time, we do create a synchronicity at that moment. So this means at that moment, we know this material is out of our time, but we get it into our time. And since our perception, the way we work with it, stays within our linearity, it is, of course, first in the linearity. But once, and I must again refer to the difference that Derrida at that time made between empreinte. What was it? The words to follow. But the moment we consider the archival material as, for instance, a psychic space, Freudian psychic space, we leave time. The psychic space does not have any linear time. It does not have time at all. It's a bascule. It's different levels of nature all infiltrate, they come together. So we are out of any linearity. And not only of linearity, but we are out of causality as well. And if we face an archive which is beyond causality, this is a real problem. It's a wonderful problem, because we have to reconstruct everything that is, or construct everything. So this is the challenge, I think, a big challenge. And more.
Thank you. Questions, interventions?
I have a similar question to Olga, but it's directed more, just more to the room, but specifically also the presentations where we saw kind of contemporary artists responding to like historic material. Olga, in your presentation with the production of the letters, the typewritten letters to Alison Knowles and Lionel as well, the kind of the material realizations of the instructions. I think I'm just really interested in where these go after, for example, they're put on display or in exhibition. Is it something that is these material realizations, are they kind of held onto or like thrown away? And I think in relation to what Hubertus was saying, maybe about this deferred originality and how there's this relationship or dialectic that's set up between, for example, the instruction and then a realization, if they're all kind of actually part of this ecology that builds around an idea, then is it something then that's kept, or where does everything go after? It's my question.
Do you want to start?
I think so, so this was a very spontaneous activation. We planned a few days before, or 1 week before, and these paperworks and poems, they were distributed to the visitors of our museum, who went home very happily.
So that's it.
Yeah, they take it with the
Yeah.
hand. Yeah.
I also got 2 or 3, and I will see if I put them into the archive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how? How exactly? I have an idea.
Just it's not an answer to your question, but in those images I showed very quickly for the exhibition at the Kloster Eberbach next year, in the before entering the Basilica, you have the chapter hall, which was the only place in the cloister where you were allowed to speak, and the monks were sitting there. And in this chapter hall, you have, and I showed you those shoes. I don't know how you say this in English. I think they're not shoes, but it's
The shoe form.
the shoe form. But as you saw by all the artists, they all made those shoe forms for concerts. And you imagine the sound of it. And then you have all those typewriters. And this, I love this idea you had in Karlsruhe, in Stuttgart. And the typewriters were all given to Francesco, with dedication. Abbott Williams, this is the machine, created everything for me 20 years until it broke down. Capro and all these machines. And where the concrete poetry was written, many coming out, of course, as well. So you have the sound. And by those two things, this is my dream, if it works, I don't know, you are creating something new, which is coming up. It's this sound. This sound and the sound we don't hear, because we have the sound of those stupid computers, which does not give a sound to the materiality anymore, which is a very big difference to all we had before. It's not an answer.
Well, one answer that could be visionally given is that when you deal with the score, the work is the score. But that doesn't mean that one realization of the score doesn't become something that you want to keep and preserve. It's one interpretation, like a recording of a particular musician, of a score that exists and has been played and will be played by many others. So again, I insist on this thing that is provisional. It's someone decides at some point that this is worth keeping, or the conditions are there to keep that realization. That makes it into an artwork, but in a sotto voce mode. It has not been decided by the artist even. It's the conditions, the context. And not to answer your question, but add something else. I think it's one dimension we didn't discuss, and for me, it's one of the most important in the archives, is that it provides parallel or alternative narratives.
Yeah.
It's a place that is not ruled by the dominant narratives, meaning that you meet, you encounter works, you discover positions that you never heard of, that you didn't know. And they are mixed with the ones that you know. So there's something historical, but then there's something like you never heard of. And that allows you potentially to rewrite art history. I mean, to at least you realize that the art history you know or you learn is only provisional as well.
Yeah. I mean, what you're saying is, and I agree. Sorry, is a bit. If you know, in the theory again, you go back, and I mentioned just briefly Echo's, I think, seminal work on Opera Aperta in '58, which is about the score in large part, about the openness or the close. So the determination or indetermination. Or you have Cage and you have Boulez, for instance. And the one, Boulez, says of the interpretation of the score, yes, there's a freedom, but it's a guided freedom. Une liberté guidée. It's a very nice approach. And Cage says, there's every freedom. We have to discover the freedom. And this is what it says. So we can, out of the score, something completely new can emerge. And this is the big, the achievement of the time of the experimental music in the 50s, exactly the time when Echo wrote his opera.
I think this question is very specific for Fluxus stuff and other intermediate stuff that require participation. So it pushes us to be active with this stuff, with object, with document, with all this accumulation in the archive. But this specific, maybe for the Fluxus archive and related things, it's not something we can extend to all the archives, no? And that is interesting, I think, because it's still alive. Is stimulating, is continue stimulating us, is asking our intervention, is asking for our participation, is a question mark. No, the video I would like to show this morning, unfortunately we haven't technical problems, so okay. But at the beginning, the young artists say, the way I open up the box determines what is the result. So it's the approach you have. So it's impossible to come out of this interactively. No, and this is. I think this is the very core of focusing Fluxus things and Fluxus archive also. No, so. What can we do with that? No, not just cataloging, not just archiving, etc. But we enter in the play. We have to enter in this dimension of play, of dream, of possibilities, and not only in the artistic way. For that, I think it was so impressive for you to see here all the stuff that Luigi, all the objects, the disseminating all over the spaces, and it's not a stimulating only for curators or scholars or artists, but also for workers, also for fashion designers, all the people that come, that they are stimulating for this mixing of the things. So this is the real question about that, all this archiving Fluxus. Maybe it's not correct to say archiving Fluxus. Maybe we have to find another way to approaching, maybe playing. I don't know. It's a question.
Yeah, maybe it's just hospitality.
Yeah, this is nice.
Yes, that's also why I think the accessibility politics of each of the archive you mentioned, I think it is also key, a key notion on what would be the accessibility politics that would be the best for each archive. Just I don't have the question, I don't have the solution, just to say it could be a good starting point to say, okay, which kind of politics do I want to set up? And as you say, Elke, in Stuttgart, you can only say 3 days, it's written on the website, but if you call, you can stay 5. So, you get this kind of, I think it's key point. One.
Yeah, I also wonder if maybe given, I don't know, I don't know if I understood correctly, but there almost seemed to be a difference in how Patrizio and Lionel, you were conceiving of the works, because I think Lionel, you're saying that the event score is the work, whereas Patrizio, I think you were kind of more saying actually it's like these things by themselves are not the works, it's actually people coming in and interacting with them. And yeah, I just wonder if there was a difference there that also maybe influences kind of other things as well. So, yeah, I don't know if that. if I'm putting words into it.
But I think it depends on our formation. So that determines the way we look at the object. Maybe this is I think that the letter of Luigi is very clear in this point of view. So I'm not collector. You see, in the short video, we cut up some part of the video, but it was a sentence very interesting. I'm not a collector. How can you say that? Luigi Bonotto, I'm not a collector. Look around you. No? How can you say that? So you don't consider yourself a collector. So what you are? What are you? No. So this is a different kind of approach. So the object has to be live. It's not possible to be a collector, to put the stuff there, waiting to increase in value, etc. No, I have to use it everyday life. No, and this is a different kind of approach. It's not. I can understand this. I'm not a collector. I'm a lover. I say no. I'm a lover. I'm in love with this object. I experience it every day. It's not a fetishism collection, like the fetish collection of coins that try to build up some holy stuff religiously, but even in a certain way live with, no? But it's a different way of approach. I think is how you grow up, was your influences, how you the formation you had, the school, your experiences, etc. For me, I'm not an art historian. I've never studied history of art, just for hobby, maybe. I have another formation, so my approach is completely free, if you want. No, I start from an unconsciousness approach, like Freud, like the game, what is meaning the game, what is living the dream, the unconsciousness, the experience, what the rest of the experience. So it's an approach completely different of, well, this was done in the 61, and this is the original one, and we have to preserve it, save it, preserve, make it holy. But yes, okay, it's been done. What you can do with this? What is asking?
Just one imperative is, all this is fine, and I agree. But the thing is, you are not free because you do not know.
Ah, yes, okay.
So there's
no, yes, right.
I know what you mean.
Yeah,
I know what you mean. But
I push on the extremity.
I think just one thing to add to your question. I must think of I don't know how much you're familiar with the British. Are we okay?
Because I think Joseph posed the question also to Lionel, no? Just to wrap up, is that correct?
Could you quickly rephrase to the part I didn't answer?
Yeah, no, I was just wondering if maybe there was a difference. It was also kind of I was wondering if there was a difference in the conception of where the work was, this question of where the work is, because I thought that when you were speaking and when Patrizia was speaking, there a difference kind of emerged. So I think you were saying that the event score is the work, whereas it seemed like when Patrizia was speaking, it was the interaction with things that is the work, and whether
I mean, I think both are kind of true. It depends also a little bit on which works, but let's say that when an artist has done a score, the great idea basically is that you cannot own the work. You can read or remember the work. You can activate or realize the work. Your realization might be interesting, great, whatever. It's provisional. It's not the definitive realization. A little bit like you play back, and I don't know. I mean, there's great musicians, but maybe you're not the best, or maybe it's not the end of the interpretation of that particular score. And then the score is also offered through publication, through even the materiality of these elements. They offer to the audience so that the audience can do exactly the same. I mean, there was a strong idea of democratization of art in Fluxus. There was a strong idea of not knowing how to do things. I mean, it's not better because you are a confirmed artist. Or it's not better because you know how to paint or sculpt. There was something that was open to the co-construction by an audience. And then in a way, as an artist, you're a member of the audience as well. And you're just a specialized part of the audience. That's why I say it's anti-hierarchical as well. And that's why I'm against bringing back hierarchy, bringing back categories, bringing back fetishization in something that was not asking for it. But it's not in contradiction with the idea of the participation of the spectator. I even said there's a strong performative paradigm in any work of Fluxus. I mean, even the things that look the most traditional in terms of an object on the wall, like a filiu. I mean, this principle of equivalence, done, well done, badly done, not done, is kind of a realization that there's not a perfect artwork. There's just like different instances of the same partition or performed element. And again, I think there's this political element for me of Fluxus archive, but any archive in that respect, is what it also allows you to reframe in terms of artistry, to get rid of the dominant narrative. For instance, the market narrative. I mean, what is the market narrative now? It's painting. It should be maximum 8 centimeters. It should be shiny in colors. And if you go to an archive, you find almost none of these objects to fit this description. So it provides already another narrative to something that, I mean, plenty of people played with Fluxus, participated to chain letters, to mail art exhibition, to performance festivals, to, so it existed. It's there. And you see what I mean?
Thanks.
In that sense, I wanted to.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you.
Just very briefly, and it's coming back also to Patricia's presentation about the, living archive. What struck me very much, and I would like just to briefly kind of return to it, is that Luigi himself, to a certain extent, was actually creating works. So this living archive, the collection, his works that we saw yesterday there, this kind of, I think, endorsed the idea of the living archive with yet another dimension that is quite interesting. Because as far as I know, none of those archives which we discussed today have...
Hans Zomi created as well.
Hans Zomi, yes.
Francesco created, because Francesco Con said, and when he was asked once, are you an artist? They said, no. But I wish the way I do the editions I'm publishing would be considered as my art. So there's always, it's not the one, as you just said, who's waiting till the value goes up.
It's actually the content.
But I want your question, because this is, in fact, it's the most intriguing question. And we have ideas of accessibility, but perhaps there are other possibilities as well. And I had to think, and I give the example, if we access an archive not by names or by numbers, so by the, let's say, the canonized nomenclature of the archival systems, but by sensations. And by I saw where did I see this just really, the noosphere, Of course, here in this house, collecting intelligence by ideas. And there was such a project once already. I don't know if you're familiar with the British architect Cedric Price. And Cedric was a fantastic, wonderful, in Fluxus times, but he didn't have anything to do directly with Fluxus, architect who, among others, conceived in the 60s the Fun Palace in London, which was never built, but others then took his ideas and built something similar later on. But Cedric Price developed an idea in Florida, which was called the generator, and for the Gilman Paper Company, because the owner was his friend. And so he developed this generator. The idea was not archive, access to the archive, but the recreational area for the workers. So they could come there, and at the end of it, there was an Atari computer. And they just gave in what they would like to do. So, for instance, they would like to read, they would like to see a film, they would just like to be calm and have good smells, they would like to make love, they would like to eat, and so on. And according to their wishes, there were thousands and thousands of diagrams which were put into the computer. This was his dream, never realized the project. And so cues, which could be as archives, they were moving around, so they would tell you where to enter the archive, or not the archive, the recreational area. And if you did not decide in time on the computer would decide for you. And unfortunately, this project was never realized, but there are thousands of documents, because he worked for 7 years, 8 years on this. The friend died then, and the son took over, and he didn't, he was not very good.
It was an idea of that time that was shared, but probably through situationism.
Yeah.
Because you remember Fallström
of course,
wanted to replace the House of Culture that just started by House of Pleasure.
Yes.
Again, another project that was not realized, not as an architect, but more like the experience. Exactly. Yeah. And I think, it's part of the zeitgeist of the moment that, culture doesn't have to be opposed with pleasure, it doesn't have to be built on knowledge. And if you look at Fluxus, the networks they build, they wanted to get rid as much of the gallery as of the museum. They didn't trust the museum to be able to carry on what they were thinking. So again, that's what I'm saying. Let's be careful with what museums do, because they transform the work of these artists. If you respect them, it's a very specific archive. I said we do not feel the same problematics with conceptual art. We have a good archive of conceptual art, or with concrete poetry. We have a good archive of concrete. We don't feel the same tension between the material and the way we work, and to abandon your idea of what kind of hospitality should be offered. I think that's something that has not been yet found. I'm doing what everyone is doing, which is trying to receive people who request the access. I cannot just leave the door open, because then it would be a bit a problem in terms of personal responsibility or museum responsibility. But I think we have to find another way to create an hospitable way to make this material available to any audience. And I think we fail to do that at the moment.
And it could even be invitation to say. Could it also be, because we are only talking about requests, but it could also be invitation.
No, but
That's what you're
sometimes
doing.
we
Just to
stimulate.
say, no, I know.
We all do trying to.
What do you mean by invitation?
Because we're talking now about requests, that means that you receive some request from a person to come to the archive, and we could even think about, it's part of what Bonotto is doing, like inviting people, but not only specialists or scholar of that subject, but inviting, I don't know, the neighbor.
Yeah.
Doesn't know.
This is again, it's the question how you reach him. Or, of course.
Yeah, at that stage, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I'd just like to point out that the way the Bonato Foundation is doing it at the moment on their homepage is, for me, very impressive, because you have full access to everything. And I know Archivio Cons is going the similar way, or I don't know who was first. And you can enlarge the pieces, you can have a close look, and I think this is probably more likely what would be possible in everyday life than actually opening the doors 24 hours a day, because it's just not possible. I mean, like you said, you have restrictions as a museum, as an archive, to look after things and make sure nobody falls down the stairs or something. So I think this could be maybe this is a very good way to make it accessible for everybody.
Yeah, Luigi strongly wants that approach to the archive in a very Fluxus way, a democratization one, to be accessible to everybody. No, so when he started, he asked permission to all the artists, and immediately they reply, yes, this is the way. Because there is the spirit of the democratization of art that still work in this way of open up, making available for everybody, free available for everybody. No, and this is important. I think it's very important, and stimulating also some other archive institutions or museum to move in this direction. And this is very interesting. Oh, it's very interesting. I think it was a visionary. And for that, we have dream, the statement, Yoko Ono dream. It's a really dream, come true, something utopic if you want, but in a certain way, real.
And it has been such a resource. I thank you, Elke, that you brought it up. It's been such a resource for students, for years, and also, one of my early resources that, whenever you cannot find an image, you can find it in Fondazione Bonato. That's quite for sure.
Yes, the interesting is that the scholars or the visitors, or web visitors, discover the things. And how to say, help us to improve the information of the website. So it become an interactive action, also archiving. So
it's a Wikipedia idea, right? It's a bit the Wikipedia idea that we share information. And then again, you don't need to organize like you don't want to do it. I mean, you can.
I don't want to do it.
So because you can do it digitally, so we can read from different points.
Object move through the categories is not fixed in one category. We establish some category for the website.
Yeah, but you can digitally, you can give more
than help the browsing, but. Then the object move of today, it's an artist book, maybe a score. The day after, maybe a painting. No, it's a document. And the same file move through the categories. You understand? So that's interesting. For that, we are dreaming, me and Luigi, of build up a real online game where you enter the website and you begin to play, not by sensations, by chance, and everything move and. Play with the stuff.
But I like this idea very much. But on the other hand, you want to touch.
Yes, this is another.
So it's like, I mean, there are many objects, of course, in Fluxus you need to touch. And just to give you, and it's more anecdotal, but when for Elke, when we restored the pianos at her exhibition in Wiesbaden last year, there was among them the piano of Takako Saito, which she showed. It was a beautiful piano, which has thousands of her cubes, which give the specific water music, and it was wrapped into a kind of plastic foil in the 90s when she made this. And we had the restorers cleaned it, and they were getting crazy, of course. So I wrote to Takako Saito and said, listen, it's a wonderful piece, we're exhibiting it. Would you mind if we renew the plastic foil which is around it? And then, as she is, she wonderfully wrote back and said, no, not at all. But the only thing I insist on is when you touch the soil foil, it should sound like a 91. This is the thing. So it is. You want to do something, and this is the problem. Yeah. But I mean, this is it counts for so many things. Yes. So I think if there were the possibility to have such a blending, to have not 24 hours or whatever, but to, like the separate price generator, to express your desire, and or be invited to express it, whatever, and to have such a combination between playing, because the notion of play is very important, and appreciating both. I mean, you don't want to harm, to destroy anything. Nobody is interested in this, normally at least. But you want to confront them and have a game of it. This would be, and I think, where all this the technological possibilities we are having, at least theoretically. There's you see things moving around by AI, so many things are possible. Why in the hell should this not be possible? Because there's no money for it, of course. Because the money is distributed differently. But perhaps one day.
Perhaps the future will bring you different solutions. And I actually love how you evoked this idea that touch and multisensorial experience is very important to Fluxus works. I absolutely agree, and perhaps if we had time, we could also pursue this idea how archive smells, how it feels, right, how it sounds as well. And I'm not just saying about this kind of sonic objects that are here and in other Fluxus archives, like we discovered yesterday. It would be fantastic, but perhaps the digital has also something. We are talking here about all levels of activation, right? So perhaps the digital also offers, a way of experiencing that involves touching, but in a different way, right? The digital, you have to touch the digital in order to kind of activate it, and you have an experience which is very different. But on the basic level, the information that is provided, for instance, scores that might be accessed online, right? Photographic documentation. This is so rich and so invaluable, really, to many students and many Fluxus researchers. I just want to say, and I know that Sally had a question. If you still have it, and we also have Hannah Higgins' comment and question in the chat. So.
Oh, thank you. It was just going back to the notion of accessibility, and I just wondered if Humbertus could just remind me of some of the things that you said about your living room, because I got the impression that this is a space where anybody can go in. Is that right? And when is it open, and what do the people that go in have access to while they're in there?
And we're just starting, so concepts may change. They have access right now from the morning from 10 o'clock till the evening 6 o'clock. So the normal working hours of the whole team, unless there are evening things, talks or seminars or whatever. and they have access to be working there. They can go through either digitally through the files server, the collection, which is upstairs in another room or other rooms, or they can go into the library, which is partly my library, large parts, and then there's documentation, Fluxus, with Fluxus documentation. They can work there. They are free, and I agree with what we said before. They are free. It's their own responsibility. The way they work there. They can be next. Somebody can pass by and have a look. But on the other hand, somebody can come from wherever, Princeton or Hong Kong or wherever, to do work on a specific thing and work there and come every day. Like you would go, or I went to the Bibliothèque Nationale every morning, 9 o'clock, I was there working. So it's different. And the last, but it's mostly, in fact, as well, considered, seen as thought as reading, conversation, and the possibility to see the editions, and of course, to acquire them as well. Very important, because we need to finance the archives somehow. So it's to acquire those, and then there will be seminars. But this is then more on special invitation for seminars or talks or performances. We're just starting, so just last week we started, so and things may change.
So basically it's an attractive space where anybody can come without appointment, and it can be researchers or the neighbours, like you said. Fantastic.
Just no hamburgers in there.
No hamburgers.
But Frankfurt. But Franks.
Excellent. So let me just take a few comments, and perhaps first one from Hannah Higgins. A while ago, she comments, Matrunas was an archivist for Jean Brown, John Hendricks for Jill and Lila Silva collection, right? What are your thoughts about the archival frameworks, files of the artists that are comparatively traditional?
Oh, can you repeat?
I think Hannah asks about, to kind of express our thoughts about the frameworks, archival frameworks and files of those artists that are comparatively traditional. Not quite sure, Hannah, if you could clarify whether you just suppose John Hendricks' archival kind of, methods and Matrunas' methods for Jean Brown with more traditional archival kind of approaches, or whether these are examples. I don't know if people want to wait until we receive clarification, but perhaps as a sort of comment.
I mean, I think it's a very clear. The question, I think, is clear. But the question implies that the archiving can only be a relative archiving, because it's an archiving which is linked to the archive. This is the Geoffrey Hendricks phrase. So the work itself shows how it wants to be archived in a certain way. So this of course counts only for it's not the question of traditional or not traditional. Fluxus, I mean, we all agree now, is archived differently. Absolutely different.
And sometimes I really love what you said, but sometimes archives, are being kind of, sometimes the artworks dictate different conditions for archiving at certain historical moments, and then they are being re-archived at other kind of historical moments, right? Say, Silverman collection that was organically kind of created around events, right, by John Hendricks, the great curator of this collection for the Detroit-based collectors, right? But when the archive entered the MoMA collection, it basically has been re-archived.
Mausoleum.
Yes, it has been institutionalized and musealized in a very different way. So I wonder whether, these conditions that the artwork dictates might change over time as well. And, different sets of, different also knowledge or even different institutional settings.
But Hannah, it always depends who listens to the artwork.
And here's the song, right? Excellent. But do we? So, do people want to comment on Hannah's question? Do we have?
Yes, I just want to maybe just add an information or comments, or maybe what I could find in Silverman Archive, Sohm Archive, and Bonotto's Archive are big yellow envelopes from proper Machunas way of classifying his things, to say, and going to from an archive to another, I could finally recognize these yellow envelopes, and we can think now that Machunas proper archives is like disseminated around these archives, and yes, sometimes it just says, okay, this is the envelope for clouds, and we can imagine like all the pictures for clouds are inside. This is one of in Stuttgart. And yes, just to say that in the Machunas archive is divided everywhere. It has been bought by each other, and yes, this one is not in a only place, and yes, we can imagine that all this collecting as also disseminating the proper founder archive. Just a comment.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much. And then up in the comments, someone says the work is dancing. Considers from inside, and I think the work, makes us dance also around it in a very different way. And I really love it. And then Hiltrud Schinzel is saying something also really interesting. I think it's directed to Elke Grün in particular. How about the aim to laugh in Fluxus? How about the laughter? Das Lachen, oder? In Fluxus. Could Elke Grün reanimate this by oral history? Are there any possibilities?
We're actually doing that in Wiesbaden. The first European Laughing Club was founded in Wiesbaden, in the Church of Michelberger. So, and he's also supporting the, how do they call them? The doctors who go into the hospital to entertain children. That's also a Wiesbaden-based clown doctors, right? So, yes, the laughing is definitely part of it, and we talked about it before, that everybody knowing Ben Patterson, there was always a big grin on his face. I mean, there was always laughing, there was always a bit of extra, and that's what I sometimes really miss when I see other people performing his pieces. It's very strict, but they very often they don't catch the spirit. And especially for Ben, I find that very important. But I guess it's for the others the same. But because I knew him quite well, I really can feel when this goes into the wrong direction.
Laughing can be a good final sentence for our work.
There are two really good questions. Yes.
Ending with laughing, having fun. I think this is a very Fluxus way to end this final.
Maybe we do that instead of clapping in the end.
Instead of clapping, would you like to close the meeting? Okay, very good. No, but thank you so much. That's great. Markus Grossold, who actually really had a health problem and had to leave us today, but he poses something really interesting here in the chat. He asks about the difference between a Fluxus museum versus a Fluxus archive, and I think we don't want to kind of go into here, examples of Fluxus museums that exist, but I know that he's very much interested in this kind of more abstract notion of the possibility perhaps of there being a Fluxus museum. Do people have thoughts on this, Fluxus museum versus Fluxus archive?
Well, probably a Fluxus museum would be some part of what Hubertus described, like a house of fun, pleasure, some part of a shop, because the figure of the shop, not to make money, but to distribute democratically, at reasonable price, the contents to an audience was quite important. So it would be a mixed bag of things. So probably it doesn't exist, or it wouldn't exist. It cannot exist.
or in a form of a playground.
Yeah, a bit of all this together would be, and then it's probably untenable and manageable in terms of museum politics, while the archive is lighter somehow. I mean, it raises a lot of questions of how to make it accessible, to how to use it within all the other things that a museum is doing, because to dedicate a museum on one kind of art is complicated as well. I mean, it exists, but it's very complicated. It encloses a lot of things. I mean, and the archive opens up possibilities. A museum of Fluxus would just close down.
And maybe it should move.
A mobile museum?
Move around the world.
Dance.
Yeah,
Could be an
it
airplane.
probably makes sense that it's a circus of some kind.
Yeah. I know that the investor of the hotel, or the planned hotel in Wiesbaden, Fluxus Hotel, that the idea was actually to have the whole ground floor as a Fluxus museum, but not so much in works as in physical works, but for example, having performers in there at certain times of the day, and having little playgrounds for Fluxus games and this sort of thing. But then the whole idea was not possible to transfer to the politicians, as in making the decision, yes, he would get that proposal. So that was very interesting, because the first question was, well, what objects will be exhibited in your museum? And he went like, no objects.
Yes.
So it was quite interesting.
Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Super. One more, no, two more. We have still from a comment from Arno Obermann, and the last one that we take today will be from Ken Friedman. So thanks so much for posing those. At Hannah, Arno Obermann is asking, what's your opinion as a conservator on allowing the interaction with fragile objects? How would you proceed? And I love this question very much. I would love to extend this question to all conservators that are here in the audience. I think I'm pointing also to Aga. If someone feels he was acting as a conservator or still wishes, very much welcome to comment. Aga, because I don't want to kind of impose on you first. I'm going to just answer it, or try to answer it in a way. It's such an interesting question, because I think it also connects with our former question. If there is no Fluxus museum, how can there be yet the kind of conventional conservation of Fluxus objects? And I think, what Fluxus does is really kind of to question very much what we do and how we do as conservators. And I think that, the Activating Fluxus project was born exactly from this recognition that Fluxus very much challenges, notions of all these paradigms of traditional conservation, originality, authenticity, authorial intention, right, and restorability, reversibility, all sorts of things. I'm not going to go into this at the end of this meeting today, due to the late hour, but I think that generally it very much challenges all conventional notions of conservation, and it asks us exactly what do we do as conservators, as carers for this work. Is conservation kind of sustainable in relation to those works at all? And the question about the fragile objects, I would like perhaps to answer in this way, that all artworks, I think, or objects are fragile, and there are perhaps the degrees of fragility that we might speak about. Is event, for instance, more fragile or less fragile, right? I don't know, a piece of food, like a food art, or a mice kind of conserved by Machunas, which I found so inspiring and found in the Jane Brown collection at the Getty. Is something, are they works like more fragile than others? And I believe that it all kind of is dependent on our notion of how we define basically objects, as fixed or as stable or less fixed, and how do we see events as something perhaps ephemeral? Because on the larger scale, there is perhaps just only this kind of permanent fluctuation of stuff, and Fluxus, shows us this very much, that there is a spectrum and a kind of a possibility between an object and an event, and that all objects are kind of perhaps more longer lasting events, and all events are perhaps very shortly lasting objects. So this is a very kind of theoretical and also temporal answer, but these are my interests generally. So thanks for posing this. Over to Aga.
Right. I mean, I think that you coined it, and there is nothing that much to add to it. But I just think that conservators work with this notion of risks. And I think that in this case, we just at some point realized that the risk is actually somewhere else. The risk is not in touching, and it's in not touching. I mean, that's the risk to the artwork. Actually, if we don't touch, we can lose the artwork, not by touching it. So that's just my comment to it, I guess.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, thank you so much. And Ken Friedman says it's hard to imagine who could afford to build a Fluxus museum. That was the former, I think, the reaction to our former comment. As the Kenyans once said, we already had to pay just to do Fluxus.
That's nice.
It's a very nice, I think, note to kind of end up the meeting. And with this, I don't know, Aga, if you have a final slide and you want to put it up. But I just want to say, again, thank you so much, everyone, for this wonderful, wonderful conversation, amazing panel, exciting discussions. Yeah. Thank you to all our speakers and for all the interactions. Thanks, everyone who basically watched us online today, for wonderful comments as well. I just want to also take this moment, and Patricia, if you want to have a final word, I will just give it to you in a second, but I want to warmly thank our hosts. Thanks everyone again. Over to Patricia.
It's been a pleasure to have you all here, all present and the connected people. I think it's very interesting meeting, stimulating. So I hope it's the first step for open up the research on this kind of stuff, how to manage it, how to active the Fluxus stuff. Thank you all. Thank you.